The distress beacon cut through the silence like a scream in the dark. Dennis Carter looked up from his medical supplies inventory, watching the emergency display flicker to life across the wall of the supply room. Red lights pulsed in rhythm with the signal, each flash representing a life somewhere out there in the black, fading fast. He moved quickly through the corridors of Refuge 9, his boots making soft sounds against the metal floor. The medical station floated in neutral space, positioned carefully between three territorial borders where ships from dozens of species could seek help without political complications. Dennis had worked here for 2 years now, and he had learned that neutral space meant everyone's problem was nobody's problem until someone decided to care. Dr. Hilva met him at the emergency bay, her 4 eyes blinking in the pattern that meant concern among her people. The Renathi physician had thin, silvery skin that reflected the station lights, and her long fingers were already pulling up the distress signal data on a floating screen. "Unknown origin," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. "The vessel's signature does not match any registry in the galactic database. Life signs are present but weakening rapidly." Dennis studied the readouts. The ship was drifting in an asteroid field about 20 minutes away by shuttle. Whoever was on board had maybe an hour left, probably less. The signal was automated, repeating over and over with no additional communication. Plog joined them, the Durnian nurse moving with the deliberate care his species was known for. He was broad and sturdy, with thick gray skin and small eyes that saw more than most gave him credit for. "Security has flagged this as potential danger," he said quietly. "Unknown species, uncharted sector, no identification. They are recommending we report it to council authorities and wait for military response." Dennis felt something tighten in his chest. He knew what that meant. By the time council military arrived, whoever was on that ship would be dead. He had not left Earth and traveled halfway across the galaxy to let people die because of paperwork and protocols. "I am going," he said simply. Hilva's eyes blinked rapidly. "Dennis, the regulations clearly state that unknown contacts must be assessed for threat level before medical intervention. If this species is hostile or carries unknown pathogens, we could be endangering the entire station." "Then I will go alone," Dennis replied, already moving toward the shuttle bay. "If there is danger, it stays with me, but I am not leaving someone to die in the dark while we debate procedure." He could hear them following behind him, their footsteps quickening. Hilva was speaking rapidly into her communication device, probably alerting station command. Plog was gathering emergency medical supplies, his efficient hands selecting exactly what might be needed for unknown biology. Despite their protests, they were helping him. That was what he appreciated most about working with them. The medical shuttle was small and fast, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. Dennis ran through the pre-flight checks with practiced speed, while Hilva continued her argument from the docking port. "At minimum, take security escort," she insisted. "Let them scan the vessel first. Security will take 30 minutes to gear up and clear launch protocols," Dennis said, powering up the engines. "Our unknown friend does not have 30 minutes. He looked at her through the shuttle window. "I will be careful. I will follow contamination protocols, but I am going now." Hilva's translator crackled with what might have been a curse in her native language. Then she tapped her communication device. "Launching medical shuttle Sierra 3 for emergency rescue operation. Pilot is Dennis Carter, human medic. Operation logged under extreme circumstance protocols." She looked back at him. "Keep your communication channel open. Report everything you see." Dennis nodded his thanks and sealed the shuttle. The launch was smooth, the station falling away behind him as he navigated toward the asteroid field. The distress beacon grew stronger, guiding him through the tumbling rocks and debris. This sector was a mess, pieces of destroyed ships and natural asteroids creating a maze that required careful flying. He found the crashed vessel wedged between 2 large asteroids, its hull scraped and dented from impacts. The design was unlike anything he had seen before, angular where most ships were curved, with protrusions that might have been weapons or sensors or something else entirely. Scorch marks covered one side, the metal blackened and melted. This ship had been attacked before it crashed. Dennis maneuvered the shuttle closer, scanning for safe docking points. The vessel's airlock was damaged but functional. Life signs showed one occupant, still alive but vital signs dropping steadily. He could see the readings fluctuating in ways that suggested either multiple organ systems or biology so different from known species that the scanner was struggling to interpret the data. Refuge 9, I am at the crash site, he reported. Vessel shows signs of weapons damage, possibly pursued before crash. One life sign detected, critical condition, preparing to board. Hilva's voice came back immediately. Dennis, station security is launching now. They insist you wait for their arrival before entering unknown vessel. Copy that, Dennis said, already suiting up in his protective gear. But the patient will be dead before they arrive. I am proceeding with rescue. He could hear the argument beginning on the other end, multiple voices overlapping. He muted the communication temporarily, needing to focus. The medical kit attached to his back, pressure suit sealed and checked. He cycled through the airlock, crossing the small gap between shuttle and unknown ship with careful magnetic steps. The damaged airlock resisted at first, then opened with a grinding sound. Emergency lighting flickered inside, casting strange shadows. The interior was hot, atmosphere breathable but thick with smoke. Dennis activated his helmet light and moved forward slowly. The corridor was cramped, designed for something larger than human but not by much. He squeezed through, following his scanner toward the life sign. The ship's interior was functional but sparse, no decorations or personal items visible. Everything was utilitarian, built for purpose rather than comfort. He found the survivor in what might have been a control room or living quarters. It was difficult to tell in the darkness and damage, but the being itself stopped Dennis in his tracks. It was large, perhaps twice his mass, covered in what looked like natural armor plating that gleamed dully in his light. 6 limbs, the front 2 clearly manipulators while the others served for movement. Multiple eyes, at least 8 that he could see, distributed around a head that was more angular than rounded. The being was pressed into a corner, making itself as small as possible despite its size. Dennis took a slow breath, assessing. 2 of the limbs were bent at unnatural angles, clearly broken. Burns covered the thorax region, the armor cracked and blackened. Dark fluid pooled beneath the being, likely blood, though the color was wrong for any species he knew. But more than the injuries, Dennis noticed the behavior. The being tracked his every movement with those multiple eyes, but it was not preparing to attack. It was watching for escape routes. Its body was curled defensively, protecting vulnerable areas. When Dennis moved his hand toward his medical kit, the being flinched violently, eyes widening. Dennis recognized that reaction. He had seen it 100 times before in 100 different situations across a dozen worlds. This being was not dangerous. It was terrified. He slowly raised both hands, showing they were empty. Then he began to speak, his voice calm and steady, knowing the words would not be understood but hoping the tone would carry meaning across the gap between species. Easy now, Dennis said quietly. I am here to help. You are hurt and I am going to make it better, but I need you to stay calm for me. The being made a sound, something between a hiss and a warble. Its eyes remained fixed on Dennis, tracking, assessing, looking for the threat it expected him to be. Dennis kept his movements slow and deliberate as he opened his medical kit. Dennis watched the being's breathing pattern, counting the rhythm. Fast and shallow, consistent with pain and fear across most species he had encountered. The multiple eyes kept darting between his hands and the exit behind him, never settling, always searching for danger. He pulled out a basic diagnostic scanner, holding it up so the being could see it clearly. The device was small, non-threatening, designed to read vital signs without contact. He pointed it at himself first, letting it beep and display his own readings on the small screen. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, he aimed it toward the injured being. The creature made that warbling sound again but did not try to move away. Dennis took that as permission and ran the scan. The results confirmed what his eyes had already told him. Multiple fractures, severe burns, internal bleeding. This being needed surgery and soon, but first it needed stabilization or it would not survive transport. His communication channel crackled to life. Dr. Hilva's voice was tense. "Dennis, station security is approaching your location. Chief Bren is demanding you extract yourself immediately and allow armed personnel to secure the unknown entity." Dennis pressed his communication button while keeping his eyes on the being. "Tell Bren I have a patient in critical condition. I am beginning emergency treatment now." "Dennis, this is Security Chief Bren." The new voice was hard and clipped, belonging to the Cortesian who ran station security. "You are ordered to exit that vessel immediately. Unknown species protocol requires armed containment and assessment before any contact beyond initial scan." "My patient is bleeding out," Dennis said calmly, pulling out a universal coagulant spray. "They have maybe 15 minutes before organ failure. I'm not leaving them to die." "That thing could be dangerous. It could be carrying pathogens. You are risking your life and potentially the entire station for an unknown." Dennis began applying the coagulant to the worst of the visible wounds, working as gently as possible. The being flinched at each touch but did not pull away. "Chief, I have worked emergency medicine in 5 different star systems. I have treated everything from Renathi to Durnians to species whose names I cannot pronounce. This being is injured and afraid. It is not aggressive." "You cannot know that. You have no data on this species, no behavioral baseline, no threat assessment." "I have eyes," Dennis replied, his hands steady as he worked. "And I have experience. This being has multiple escape routes it is not taking. It has natural weapons it is not using. When I approached, it made itself smaller, not larger. These are fear responses, not aggression displays." The being made a different sound now, softer, almost questioning. One of its uninjured limbs moved slightly, not toward Dennis but not away either. He took it as a good sign and continued working, applying pressure bandages to the worst injuries, checking for additional trauma. Bren's voice carried frustration. "I have protocols to follow, Carter. Unknown species are detained and assessed. Period. My team is boarding that vessel in 30 seconds and you will comply with their instructions." Dennis looked up at the being, seeing the way its eyes tracked the conversation even though it could not understand the words. It knew something was happening, could probably hear the multiple voices through his communication channel. And it was getting more agitated, breathing faster, limbs beginning to tense. "Chief, listen to me carefully," Dennis said, working to keep his voice. "Level, your armed team is going to make this situation worse. This being has been attacked already. Look at the weapon's damage on its ship. It fled here for safety and crashed. It is alone, injured, and terrified. When your people come in with guns drawn, what do you think will happen?" There was a pause, then Bren spoke again, his tone slightly less certain. "It could panic and become dangerous, which is exactly why we need weapons ready." "It will panic," Dennis confirmed. "And in its panic it will hurt itself worse trying to escape or defend itself. I have seen this before, Chief, on Earth, in the conflict zones where I worked. Fear makes people dangerous not because they want to hurt you, but because they are trying desperately not to be hurt. The presence of weapons escalates everything." He could hear sounds now, boots on metal, voices calling out in Cortesian military speech. The security team was entering the vessel. The being heard them too, its multiple eyes suddenly fixing on the doorway behind Dennis. Its body tensed, the uninjured limbs moving into what was clearly a defensive stance. The wounds Dennis had just treated began seeping again as the being's physiology responded to the perceived threat. "Stand down, human." Bren's voice now came from behind Dennis, amplified by armor speakers. "Step away from the unknown entity, now." Dennis turned slowly, keeping his body between the being and the armed security team that now filled the damaged corridor. Chief Bren stood at the front, his Cortesian bulk encased in full tactical armor, weapon raised but not quite aimed. Behind him, 4 more security officers maintained similar positions, creating a wall of armored threat. The being behind Dennis made a sound Dennis had not heard before, a high-pitched keen that spoke of pure terror. He could feel it moving, trying to press further into the corner despite its injuries, trying to make itself disappear. "Chief Bren," Dennis said quietly, not moving, "lower your weapons, please." "That is not going to happen. This is a potential hostile situation. Standard protocol requires armed containment until threat assessment is complete." Bren's weapon stayed steady, trained past Dennis toward the being. "Last warning, Carter, move aside." Dennis stayed exactly where he was. He could see his own reflection in Bren's armor visor, could see how small he looked compared to the armed and armored. Security team. But he had not come all this way, had not left Earth and everything he knew to let fear win again. "I am invoking medical authority," Dennis said, pulling out the one card he had. "Under Galactic Medical Council Regulations, Section 7, Article 12, a certified medical professional has final authority over patient welfare in emergency situations. This being is my patient. It is critically injured and in my medical care. You are interfering with treatment and endangering patient survival." Bren actually laughed, a harsh sound through the speakers. "You are invoking medical authority over an unknown species that is not even classified. That regulation applies to recognized galactic citizens, not unknowns from uncharted space." "It applies to any being in medical distress," Dennis countered. "The regulation does not specify species recognition. It says any being. Check the actual wording if you do not believe me." There was a pause. Dennis could imagine Bren accessing the regulations through his armor systems, verifying the claim. The pause stretched longer. Behind Dennis, the being's breathing was ragged, pained. He could hear the fluid sounds that meant internal bleeding was getting worse. Finally, Bren spoke again. "Even if that regulation applies, it does not prevent security from maintaining armed presence for safety purposes." "Your armed presence is killing my patient," Dennis said bluntly. "Look at your scanner readings. Compare them to 30 seconds ago. The stress response to your weapons is causing the injuries to worsen. Every second you stand there with guns drawn, this being's chance of survival drops." "That is not my concern. My concern is station safety." "Then consider this," Dennis said, an idea forming. "You are worried this being is dangerous, but it has been alone with me for nearly 10 minutes. Unarmed human, soft flesh, easy target. If it wanted to hurt someone, I would already be dead. Instead, it has let me treat its injuries without resistance." He paused, letting that sink in. "Maybe your threat assessment is wrong." He could see Bren considering this, could almost watch the calculation happening behind the armor visor. The security chief was not stupid, just careful. And maybe, Dennis hoped, he was capable of changing his mind when presented with evidence. 60 seconds, Bren finally said. "Lower weapons for 60 seconds. Watch the creature's response. If it shows any sign of aggression, we are going to come back to lethal force readiness." The security team lowered their weapons slowly, clearly unhappy but following orders. Dennis heard the change immediately in the being's breathing. The panicked keen softened to something quieter. The defensive tension in its limbs decreased slightly. Dennis turned back to his patient, speaking in that same calm tone. "See, they are not going to hurt you. We are all here to help." He resumed treatment, working on stabilizing the internal injuries as best he could with field equipment. The being watched him work, those multiple eyes tracking every movement. Then, slowly, one of its uninjured limbs reached out and touched Dennis's shoulder. The contact was gentle, questioning, testing. Dennis did not pull away. "Yeah," he said softly, "we are going to get you fixed up." The portable medical station took shape in the cramped space of the crashed vessel, Dr. Hilva and Plog working with quiet efficiency to set up the equipment Dennis needed. Bren had agreed to let the medical team approach, though his security personnel maintained their perimeter outside. The compromise was uncomfortable but functional. Dennis worked to stabilize the worst of the internal bleeding while Hilva ran continuous scans. Her 4 eyes moved rapidly across the data displays, her musical voice murmuring observations. Respiratory system appears to use a dual-chamber process. Fascinating. The physiology is unlike anything in our databases. Can you keep them alive? Dennis asked, not looking up from his work. I believe so. The injuries are severe but not beyond our capabilities once we understand the basic biology. Hilva paused. Though I must admit, I am surprised by the patient's cooperation. Most beings in this much pain would be resistant to treatment from unknown providers. Plog carefully set a broken limb, his steady hands applying a universal stabilizer. The being made a pained sound but did not pull away. It trusts us, the Durnian nurse said simply. Or at least it trusts Dennis. Dennis thought about the years before he came to Refuge 9, the time he spent in Earth's conflict zones. He had learned there that pain was universal, but so was the need for connection, for help, for someone to care. Species did not matter when you were hurt and alone. Only intention mattered, only the choice to help or to harm. I worked in places where there was no common language, Dennis said, adjusting the flow of synthetic plasma substitute into the being system. You learn to read people differently, not their words but their actions, their fear. This being has been terrified from the moment I found them, but terror and aggression are not the same thing. Hilva's translator made a sound that might have been thoughtful agreement. On my homeworld, we have a saying, the frightened animal bites not from malice but from memory of previous pain. Perhaps that applies across all species. The being's vital signs were improving, slowly but measurably. The emergency treatment was working. Dennis allowed himself a moment of relief before the next crisis announced itself through his communication channel. Carter, this is Station Command. The voice belonged to Administrator Welks, a human like Dennis but one who had spent 30 years in galactic bureaucracy. We have a developing situation. Multiple vessels of unknown design have entered the sector. They match the crashed ship's configuration, and they are armed. Dennis looked at the being, seeing the way its eyes tracked to the communication device. Could it hear the transmission? Did it understand what was happening? How many ships? Dennis asked. 3 confirmed, possibly more in the asteroid field. They are attempting communication, but our translation matrix cannot parse their language. They appear to be searching for something. Welks paused. Most likely for their missing crew member. Bren's voice cut in. I am moving security to defensive positions. If these vessels are hostile, we need to be prepared. Chief, wait, Dennis said quickly. Think about what they see. Their ship was attacked and crashed. Now they find it surrounded by armed forces. Of course they are coming in ready for a fight. They think we are the ones who hurt their crew member. We do not know what they think, Bren countered. We only know they are armed and approaching. I will not leave this station vulnerable to attack. Dennis felt the being's limb on his shoulder again, the touch more urgent now. He looked into those multiple eyes and saw something he recognized. Not just fear for itself, but fear for what might happen next. Fear of violence spreading, of mistakes compounding into tragedy. Administrator Welks, permission to attempt contact, Dennis said. Let the patient signal. Their own people, show them that we are helping, not harming. That is an enormous risk, Welks replied. We would be giving an unknown species access to communications during a potential hostile situation. The alternative is both sides shooting first and asking questions later, Dennis said. I have seen that play out. It never ends well. There was a long pause. Dennis could imagine the calculation happening on the station, the weighing of risks and protocols and possible outcomes. Finally, Welks spoke. Chief Bren, what is your assessment? Bren was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried reluctant respect. The human has been right so far. The creature has not shown aggression despite opportunity. And escalation serves no one if this is truly a rescue operation rather than an invasion. Very well, Welks said. Carter, you have authorization to attempt communication with the unknown vessels through the patient. But security remains at high alert. At the first sign of hostile action, we are going to defensive protocols. Dennis looked at the being, then at the communication device. How did you explain this across species barriers? How did you ask someone to trust you when you had no shared language, no common reference points? He picked up a portable communication unit, one with a visual display. Slowly, he showed the being his own face on the screen, then pointed to himself. Recognition seemed to spark in those multiple eyes. Then Dennis pointed the device at the being and activated the camera, showing it its own image. Understanding flowed across alien features. Dennis called up the medical scanner readings, showing the being its own vital signs improving, the treatment working. He gestured to Hilva and Plog, to their medical equipment, to the care they were providing. Then he brought up an image of the three approaching ships on the display. The being made a sound, different from before. Urgent. It reached for the communication device with one of its uninjured limbs. Dennis helped it hold the device steady, adjusting the settings to broadcast on the frequencies the approaching ships were using. What followed was a stream of sounds Dennis could not begin to interpret, but the emotion behind them was clear even across species. The being was not calling for help or crying for rescue. It was telling a story. It gestured to its injuries, to the medical team, to Dennis himself. It showed the device around the crashed ship, the damage, the treatment. Through the communication channel, Dennis could hear the response from the approaching vessels. The tone changed, became less sharp, less urgent. Questions rather than challenges. Plog worked on the translation matrix, feeding in the new linguistic data as fast as the system could process it. "I am getting partial translation," he said. "They are asking about the patient's condition. They want to know if we are holding their crew member against their will." Dennis looked at the being. "Can you tell them you are staying by choice, that we are helping?" The being seemed to understand, or at least to grasp the intent behind the question. It made more sounds into the communication device, its tone becoming almost insistent. One of its limbs stayed on Dennis's shoulder the entire time, maintaining that physical connection. The approaching ship slowed. On the station scanners, their weapons systems powered down slightly. Not disarmed, but no longer primed for immediate firing. "They are requesting permission to dock," Administrator Welks reported. "They want to retrieve their injured crew member and verify their safety." "Tell them yes," Dennis said, "but medical bay only, limited delegation, and tell them to come unarmed if possible." "You are asking for a lot of trust from a species we know nothing about," Welks pointed out. "I am asking for the same trust they are showing by not shooting at us," Dennis replied. "Their crew member was attacked. They have every reason to assume we did it, but they are willing to talk. We should meet them halfway." The negotiations took another 20 minutes, time during which Dennis continued treating the patient. The being's condition stabilized enough for transport. Hilva declared it safe to move to the station's medical bay, where better equipment waited. Moving the being onto a transport stretcher required care and communication. Dennis walked the patient through each step, showing what would happen before it happened. The being cooperated, its trust in the medical team apparently growing stronger as the treatment continued to work. The journey back to Refuge 9 was tense. Dennis rode in the medical transport with the patient while Bren's security team escorted them. The three unknown vessels maintained position near the station, waiting. When they arrived at the medical bay, the delegation from the unknown species was already there. Three beings similar to the patient, though uninjured and wearing what looked like environment suits. They were large and armored, moving with a grace that suggested power held carefully in check. Dennis helped transfer the patient to a proper medical bed, continuing the monitoring and treatment. The three newcomers approached slowly, their multiple eyes taking in everything. They looked at their injured crew member, at the medical equipment, at the station personnel. One of them made sounds toward Plog, who was frantically updating the translation matrix. After a moment, a crude translation began to appear on screens around the bay. "You helped, why?" Dennis looked at the three beings, then at his patient. "How did you explain compassion to someone who had no context for it? How did you bridge that gap?" "Because they needed help," Dennis said simply, knowing Plog's system would attempt translation. That is what we do here. Anyone who comes to Refuge 9 seeking medical care receives it. Species does not matter, only need matters. The translation seemed to process. The three beings looked at each other, then back at Dennis. One of them approached closer, studying him with those multiple eyes. When it spoke again, the translation came through more clearly. Our people are called Vranic. We are explorers from distant space. Your region is new to us. We did not know if any species here would help or harm. The being gestured to the patient. Torvin is our navigator. We thought Torvin lost. You have given back what we believed dead. Dennis felt the weight of that statement. This was not just a rescue. This was first contact between species who knew nothing of each other, who had no shared history except violence and fear, and this one moment of choosing differently. The medical bay settled into a careful rhythm over the following hours. Dennis and his team worked on Torvin while the three Vranic delegation members watched from a respectful distance. Trust was building, but it was fragile, constructed from gestures and tones rather than words. Plog made progress with the translation matrix, feeding in more Vranic vocalizations and cross-referencing them against known linguistic patterns. The translations were rough but improving, enough to enable basic communication. The Vranic who seemed to lead the delegation identified themselves as Kellys and Explorer Captain. Torvin's ship was attacked 3 cycles ago, Kellys explained through the translation system, the words appearing on floating displays while their voice provided the original sounds. Raiders, they saw unknown vessel and pursued. Torvin fled into asteroid field. We lost contact, searched for 2 cycles before finding the crash. Dennis applied a dermal regenerator to one of Torvin's burn wounds, watching the tissue begin to repair itself. The Raiders, do they operate in this sector often? We do not know this sector, Kellys replied. All is unknown to us. We come from far beyond your charted space, exploring, seeking new regions to understand. The Vranic shifted, armor plates making soft sounds. We did not expect violence. Our first encounter with local species was weapons fire. Dr. Hilva looked up from her scan results. The Raiders were likely pirates. They operate outside galactic law, attacking vessels they perceive as easy targets. Your ship, being unknown to them, would have appeared vulnerable. Kellys made a sound the translation matrix interpreted as bitter agreement. We learned this. Torvin learned this. Dennis glanced at Torvin, who was awake now and listening to the conversation despite obvious pain. The Vranic navigator's multiple eyes tracked between the speakers, following the discussion. When those eyes met Dennis's, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The acknowledgement that both of them had seen what fear could do. On my world, Dennis said carefully, we had a long history of shooting first and asking questions later. Different groups of humans, unable to communicate, would see each other as threats. Violence became the default response to the unknown. Kellys tilted their head in what might have been curiosity. This is past behavior for your species. For many of us, yes, Dennis said. We learned, slowly and at terrible cost, but we learned. That is why I work here now in neutral space, treating anyone who needs help regardless of where they come from. He paused. I left Earth because I wanted to prove that understanding could bridge any gap, even between species who have no common ground except being alive and being afraid. The translation seemed to struggle with that concept, producing several alternate interpretations before settling on one. Kelly studied Dennis for a long moment. You recognized. Torvin's fear, how? You have never encountered Vranic before. Our biology, our behavior, all unknown to you. Yet you knew. Dennis thought about how to explain this. Fear looks the same everywhere I have been. The details change, but the pattern holds, making yourself smaller to avoid notice, watching for escape routes, flinching from sudden movement. Torvin did all of these things. He gestured to the Vranic navigator. And I have learned that beings in that much fear are not usually the dangerous ones. The dangerous ones are the ones who respond to that fear with violence. Like the armed security team, Kellys observed, with weapons ready. Chief Bren was following protocols designed to protect the station, Dennis said, though he understood the Vranic's perspective. He saw unknown and thought danger, but yes, like the security team. Fear makes everyone dangerous, even those trying to help. Torvin made a sound, struggling to sit up slightly. Plog moved to adjust the bed, supporting the Vranic navigator carefully. When Torvin spoke, the translation came through slowly but clearly. I thought I would die alone in the dark, after fleeing from weapons, after being hunted. Torvin's eyes found Dennis. Then you came, no weapons, hands open, speaking with sounds I could not understand but tone I could. You were not afraid of me. I was afraid, Dennis admitted. I just did not let fear decide my actions. Kelly's made a sound the translation suggested was approval or respect. This is not common in our experience. Most species we have encountered show fear through aggression or retreat. You showed fear through care. This is new to us. Dr. Hilva finished updating Torvin's medication dosage and stepped back, her 4 eyes blinking in satisfaction. The patient is stabilizing well. Full recovery will take time, but the critical danger has passed. She looked at the Vranic delegation. Your navigator was fortunate. Another hour without treatment would have resulted in cascading organ failure. We are grateful, Kelly said. This gratitude is difficult to express in your language. In Vranic culture, life debt is sacred. Torvin now carries obligation to Dennis Carter and this station. This is not simple thanks. This is bond. Dennis felt uncomfortable with that weight. I was just doing my job. Any medic would have done the same. No, Kelly said firmly. Any medic would have followed. Protocol would have waited for security clearance, would have prioritized safety over unknown life. You chose differently. This choice matters. Administrator Welks entered the medical bay, his presence bringing a shift in the atmosphere. The human administrator nodded to the Vranic delegation before addressing Dennis. I have been in communication with the Galactic Council. They want a full report on this first contact situation. They are also expressing concern about unknown species operating in charted space without proper diplomatic clearance. Kelly's armor plates shifted, a reaction that suggested tension. We did not know this space was charted. We came from beyond your maps. Are we now considered criminals for exploring? Welks held up a hand in a calming gesture. Not criminals, but the Council has protocols for new species contact. There are steps to be followed, diplomatic channels to establish, security assessments to complete. He looked apologetic. Politics, essentially, bureaucracy, the same frustrating process that slows everything down. We do not wish conflict, Kelly said. We wish only to explore and return home with knowledge of new regions. If your council requires meetings, we will attend. But our crew needs to leave soon. We have been away from our homeworld for many cycles. Resources grow thin. I understand, Welks replied, and I am working to expedite the process, but it would help if you could provide some basic information. Where is your homeworld? How did you reach this sector? What are your intentions for future exploration? The Vranic delegation exchanged looks that Dennis could not quite interpret. Kelly's finally spoke. Our homeworld is many jumps distant. We use different navigation methods than your species, traveling through regions you may not chart the same way. Our intentions are peaceful exploration only. We seek knowledge, not territory or conflict. Bren had entered the bay during this exchange, his armor removed now but his bearing still military. The Council will want more than verbal assurances. They will want technological exchanges, biological samples, cultural information. They will want to understand you completely before trusting you. And if we do not wish to share all of this, Kelly's asked, if we wish to maintain some privacy while still operating peacefully in this region, then the Council will likely restrict your movement. Bren said bluntly, unknown variables make them nervous. They prefer everything documented and understood. Dennis could see the situation deteriorating, could feel the careful trust built over the past hours beginning to crack under the pressure of politics and bureaucracy. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid. First contact should not become first conflict just because paperwork demanded it. What if we start smaller? Dennis suggested. Everyone turned to look at him. Not full diplomatic relations with all the requirements and restrictions, just basic exchange. Medical knowledge, for instance. Dr. Hilva and I learned a lot treating Torvin. That information could help both our species, and the Vranic could share what they know about regions beyond our charts. Information exchange, not political treaties. Kellys seemed to consider this. This would be acceptable, knowledge shared freely without obligation or territorial claims. It would also give the Council something concrete to work with, Welks added, warming to the idea. Medical cooperation is always viewed favorably, less threatening than military or territorial discussions. Bren looked skeptical but did not object. Dennis took that as progress. Torvin spoke again, the translation coming through stronger as the Matrix learned more of the Vranic language. Dennis Carter showed my people that not all encounters must be feared. Perhaps this medical exchange shows your council the same. That unknown can mean opportunity, not only threat. Dennis met the navigator's multiple eyes and nodded. That is the hope, yes. The data exchange began the following day, with Dr. Hilva coordinating between the station's medical database and the information the Vranic provided. Dennis watched as biological data flowed between species, each side learning how the other functioned, what could heal them, what might harm them. It was technical work, but it felt like building a bridge one calculation at a time. Torvin's recovery progressed steadily. The Vranic navigator could move now, though still carefully and with support. The broken limbs were healing, the burns regenerating, the internal damage being repaired by a combination of station medicine and Vranic biological resilience. Dennis found Torvin in the medical bay observation area, looking out at the stars through the wide viewport. The Vranic turned at his approach, multiple eyes reflecting. The distant light. Your space looks different from ours, Torvin said, the translation now smooth enough for almost natural conversation. The stars are positioned differently, strange constellations, unfamiliar patterns. You are a long way from home, Dennis observed, moving to stand beside the viewport. Yes, many jumps, many cycles of travel. Torvin was quiet for a moment. When the raiders attacked, I thought I would never see those familiar stars again, die alone in unknown space with no one to carry my story back. Dennis knew that feeling, the isolation of being far from everything familiar. But you survived, and now your people know where you are. Because you chose to help rather than to fear, Torvin looked at him. This is what I do not understand about your species. The security chief, he feared me. His response was weapons and containment. But you also human, your response was care. How can one species contain such different reactions? We are complicated, Dennis admitted. Humans have capacity for great violence and great compassion, sometimes in the same person. What we choose in the moment makes all the difference. He paused. I chose to see your fear because I have felt it myself. I have been the stranger in unknown places, unsure if the people around me would help or harm. That memory changes how you respond to others in the same situation. Torvin made a sound that might have been understanding. On our homeworld, we have territories divided by deep mistrust, Vranic clans that have fought for generations over resources and space. We know fear between our own kind. Perhaps that is why we expected weapons when we encountered your species. We projected our own conflicts onto you. And found something different, Dennis said. Found you, Torvin corrected. Not all humans respond as you did. The security chief made that clear. Bren is not wrong to be cautious, Dennis said, feeling the need to defend his colleague despite their disagreement. He has responsibilities. The station houses thousands of beings from dozens of species. One wrong decision could endanger all of them. His caution comes from care for those under his protection, just different expression than mine. Fear from care versus fear from threat, Torvin mused. Both fear but different sources, interesting distinction. Kellys entered the observation area, accompanied by Dr. Hilva, the Vranic captain. Carried a small crystalline object that caught the starlight and fractured it into colors Dennis had never seen before. Torvin, you look stronger, Kellys said, their tone carrying obvious relief. The human medicine works well. Very well, Torvin agreed. I will be able to travel soon, return home with you. Kelly's turned to Dennis. Which brings us to difficult conversation. Our crew grows restless. We have been in this sector longer than planned. Food supplies run low for our biology. We must depart within 2 cycles. Dennis felt a surprising pang of loss at that news. I understand. You have your own people waiting for your return. Yes, but we do not wish to leave without expressing proper gratitude. Kelly's held out the crystalline object. This is navigation crystal from our homeworld. Vranic explorers carry them for luck and guidance. I would give this to you, Dennis Carter, as symbol of life, debt, and respect. Dennis took the crystal carefully, feeling its weight in his palm. The object was warm, as if it held its own internal light. I cannot accept payment for medical care. That goes against the principles of Refuge 9. Not payment, Kelly said firmly. Gift, symbol, reminder that one human chose compassion when weapons would have been easier. This matters to my people. When we return home and tell our story, your name will be remembered. Dennis Carter, who saw fear and responded with help. Dr. Hilva's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, and what Dennis had learned was emotional response. This is significant honor in Vranic culture. I have learned this through our data exchange. To refuse would be insult. Dennis looked at the crystal, then at Kelly's and Torvin. Then I accept with gratitude, and I would ask one thing in return. Name it, Kelly said immediately. When your people explore this region in the future, remember that not all encounters will be like ours. You will meet species who respond with fear and weapons, some because they are cruel, but many because they are afraid like Torvin was afraid. Do not let those encounters make you believe all beings in this space are hostile. Dennis paused. Give them the same chance you gave us. Look for the helpers, not just the threats. Torvin made a sound that the translation suggested was approval. We will remember, and we will share this story with other Vranic crews. Perhaps future explorers will come seeking medical knowledge. Exchange rather than expecting weapons fire. That would be a good outcome, Dennis agreed. Administrator Welks appeared in the observation area, his expression troubled. I apologize for the interruption, but we have received communication from the Galactic Council. They are sending a diplomatic team to meet with the Vranic delegation. They want formal first contact protocols established. Kelly's armor plates shifted, and what Dennis had learned was frustration. How long will this take? Several days at minimum, Welks said apologetically. The Council moves slowly on matters of new species contact. There will be meetings, assessments, documentation requirements. We cannot wait several days, Kelly said. Our crew needs to depart within 2 cycles. Resources do not allow for extended delay. I understand, but the Council is insistent. They view proper diplomatic protocols as essential for galactic stability. Welks looked genuinely sorry. If you depart before meeting with them, they may classify the Vranic as non-cooperative. That could lead to travel restrictions, denied access to this region, potential classification as security concern. Dennis could see the situation spiraling again. Every time they built trust, bureaucracy threatened to tear it down. What if the Vranic met with the Council delegation remotely, through communication systems rather than in person? That way they could depart on schedule while still satisfying the Council's requirements. The Council prefers face-to-face diplomatic contact, Welks said. The Council prefers a lot of things that are not always practical, Dennis countered. Remote communication is standard for long-distance diplomatic work. If the alternative is the Vranic leaving without any Council contact at all, surely remote meeting is better than nothing. Welks considered this. I can propose it, but I cannot guarantee the Council will accept. Propose it strongly, Dennis suggested. Point out that forcing the Vranic to stay against their resource limitations creates hostility where there was cooperation. Remind them that this entire first contact happened because of medical emergency, not planned diplomatic outreach. The fact that the Vranic are willing to communicate at all should be viewed as positive, not as minimum requirement. Bren, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, spoke up. The human makes good points. from security. Perspective, cooperative species who depart peacefully are preferable to frustrated species who feel trapped by our bureaucracy. Let them go home with positive impressions, not negative ones. Welks nodded slowly. I will make the argument to the council, strongly, as Dennis suggests. He looked at Kelly's. But I need your commitment that the Vranic will participate in the remote diplomatic contact, that your people will not simply disappear back into uncharted space and refuse further communication. You have our commitment, Kelly said. We wish peaceful relations with your galactic community. We simply also wish to not starve waiting for your bureaucrats to schedule meetings. Despite the tension, Dennis smiled at that. The translation matrix had apparently learned how to convey sarcasm in Vranic speech. That felt like progress somehow, the ability to be frustrated together across species barriers. Over the next cycle, preparations moved forward on multiple fronts. Dr. Hilva completed the medical data exchange, both species now possessing basic knowledge of how to treat the other. Plog refined the translation matrix further, creating a portable version the Vranic could take with them for future communication. Bren worked with Kelly's on safe travel coordinates, establishing routes where Vranic explorers could move without triggering security alerts. And Dennis spent time with Torvin, sharing stories of Earth and learning about the Vranic homeworld. They discovered surprising parallels despite the vast differences in biology and culture. Both species had known war and peace, fear and courage, isolation and connection. Both had learned, slowly and painfully, that the unknown did not have to mean enemy. On the final day before the Vranic departure, Torvin pulled Dennis aside. I want to ask something before I leave. Torvin led Dennis to a quiet corner of the medical bay, away from the bustle of final preparations. The Vranic navigator moved with increasing confidence now, the healing nearly complete. Only the faint discoloration of regenerated armor plating showed where the worst injuries had been. You saved my life, Torvin said simply. But you also changed how I see this region of space. Before the attack, I thought of exploration as finding resources and cataloging star systems. Now I understand it can be finding connection between species, understanding across impossible differences. Dennis nodded, unsure where this was leading but willing to listen. So my question is this, Torvin continued. Why did you really come to this station? You spoke of leaving Earth to prove understanding could bridge gaps, but that is general answer. What specific thing drove you away from your homeworld to work in neutral space? Dennis was quiet for a long moment. He had not talked about this much, not even with Hilva and Plog, who had become his closest colleagues. But Torvin had trusted him in moments of fear and pain. That deserved honesty in return. I was working in a conflict zone on Earth, Dennis said finally. Two groups of humans fighting over territory and resources. I was part of a medical team that treated anyone who came to us, regardless of which side they were from. One day, fighters from both sides ended up in our facility at the same time, both badly injured from the same explosion. He paused, remembering. They were terrified of each other. Even bleeding and dying, they saw each other as threats. I tried to explain that we were there to help everyone, that their injuries did not care about politics or sides. But fear was stronger than logic. One of them tried to attack the other, despite being barely able to move. Tore open his own wounds in the process, died before we could stop the bleeding. Torvin listened without interrupting. Multiple eyes focused on Dennis with complete attention. The other fighter saw this and started crying, Dennis continued. Said they had been childhood friends before the conflict divided their communities, had played together as children, gone to the same schools, shared the same neighborhood. Then politics and fear turned them into enemies, and fear killed one of them in a medical facility that should have been safe space. This haunts you, Torvin observed. Yes, Dennis admitted. Because I knew what fear looked like in both of them, I could see it clearly, but I could not make them see past it to recognize each other as people who needed help. I failed to bridge that gap. He looked at Torvin. When I found you in that crashed ship, terrified and alone, I saw that same fear, but this time I knew I could not let weapons and protocols turn the situation into another tragedy. I had to try differently. And it worked, Torvin said softly, because you recognized my fear and responded to it with compassion instead of more fear. It worked this time, Dennis corrected. It does not always work. Sometimes fear wins. Sometimes weapons fire before understanding gets a chance. But I have to keep trying because the alternative is accepting that fear is stronger than connection. I am not ready to accept that. Torvin was quiet for a moment, then made a gesture with their limbs that the translation matrix interpreted as profound respect. You carry sorrow and hope together. This is difficult balance. Most beings choose one or the other. Let sorrow make them bitter or hope make them naive. You hold both in tension. Let them inform each other. Dennis had never thought of it that way, but Torvin was right. The memory of failure kept him realistic, but the possibility of success kept him trying. Neither alone would have been enough. When you return to your people, Dennis said, what will you tell them about this region of space? Truth, Torvin replied. That we were attacked by raiders who saw unknown ship as prey, that we crashed alone and injured in hostile territory, that armed security forces initially treated us as threat. The Vranic paused. But also that one human medic saw past the fear to the person beneath it, that your station chose medical care over military containment, that your species contains both weapons and healing, and individuals must choose which to offer. That is fair assessment, Dennis said. It is complicated assessment, Torvin added, which matches complicated reality. Simple stories would be easier to tell, but less true. I will give my people complexity and let them decide how to respond when they encounter your species again. Kellys appeared in the doorway, signaling that the Vranic ships were prepared for departure. The moment Dennis had known was coming had arrived. The farewell took place in the docking bay, with Administrator Welks officially representing the station and Chief Bren maintaining security presence that was more ceremonial than threatening. Dr. Hilva and Plog stood with Dennis, the medical team that had saved Torvin's life and proved that different species could work together. The Galactic Council has agreed to remote diplomatic contact, Welks announced. You are cleared for departure with the understanding that communication will be maintained for formal first contact protocols. We will honor this agreement, Kellys confirmed. Vranic explorers keep their commitments. Bren stepped forward, his posture less rigid than usual. I apologize for the initial weapons response. Protocol demanded it, but Dennis was right that it complicated the situation unnecessarily. I have filed recommendations for revised security procedures regarding unknown species contact. Kellys tilted their head in acknowledgement. Your caution was understandable given circumstances. We hold no resentment, and your later cooperation was appreciated. The formal statements complete, Torvin approached Dennis one last time. The Vranic navigator held out something small, another crystalline object, but different from the one Kellys had given. This one was darker, with veins of color running through it like captured lightning. This is personal gift, separate from Kellys' official offering, Torvin said. It is piece of my navigation crystal broken off during the crash. I have carried it since the attack, a reminder of how close I came to dying alone in the dark. The Vranic placed the crystal in Dennis's hand. Now it is reminder of something different, of the human who chose compassion when weapons would have been easier. Dennis closed his fingers around the crystal, feeling its warmth. I will remember you, Torvin, and I will remember that fear does not have to win. Neither of us will forget, Torvin agreed. We carry these stories forward. The Vranic delegation boarded their ships, the docking clamps releasing with metallic sounds. Through the viewport, Dennis watched the three vessels move away from the station, navigating through the asteroid field with practiced skill. They had come to this region by accident, fleeing from violence and fear. They left as allies, proof that first contact did not have to end in conflict. Dr. Hilva stood beside Dennis, her 4 eyes tracking the departing ships. You did something important here, not just saving a life, though that matters deeply. You showed everyone watching that there is another way to respond to the unknown. I just did what felt right, Dennis said. Which is exactly why it mattered, Hilva replied. Following protocol is easy. Choosing compassion over safety that requires courage. You have that courage. Plog joined them, his steady presence comforting. The translation matrix data we gained from the Vranic will help with future unknown species contact. Medical knowledge exchange was successful, and we have established communication protocols that others can use. He paused. Practical outcomes from emotional choice both matter. Bren approached as the Vranic ships disappeared from view, jumping to whatever navigation method carried them between stars. The security chief looked uncomfortable but determined. I was wrong to insist on armed containment immediately, Bren said. Not wrong to be cautious, but wrong in application. You saw something I missed because my training focused on threat assessment, not fear recognition. He met Dennis's eyes. I would like to work with you on developing better protocols, something that balances security concerns with medical approach. Train my teams to recognize fear responses versus aggression displays. Dennis felt surprised but pleased. I would be happy to help with that. Good, Bren said gruffly, because you were right about another thing too. Fear makes everyone dangerous, even those trying to protect others. My teams need to understand that. Over the following days, word of the Vranic encounter spread through the galactic networks. Most stations reported it as straightforward first contact, unknown species discovered and diplomatic protocols established. But some versions included details about the human medic who recognized fear in an alien and chose compassion over containment. Those versions traveled farther, resonated deeper. Dennis received messages from medical personnel across the galaxy, thanking him for demonstrating another approach. He received criticism, too, from security professionals who insisted protocol existed for good reasons and should not be abandoned based on individual judgment. Both responses were valid, both contained truth. The complexity matched the reality. 3 weeks after the Vranic departure, Dennis was back on night shift when another distress call came through. Unknown vessel, unknown species, entering station space with failing systems and desperate need for help. This time, when security responded, Bren contacted Dennis first. Unknown ship broadcasting distress on all frequencies, the security chief reported. Initial scans show no weapons, but species is not in our database. What is your assessment? Dennis studied the readings, looking at the vessel's trajectory, the signal patterns, the desperation in the automated distress call. They are afraid, he said, and they are asking for help. Acknowledged, Bren replied. Medical team is cleared. To respond, security will maintain defensive perimeter, but weapons will not be primary contact. I am sending my team members who completed your fear response training last week. Dennis smiled as he prepared the medical shuttle for launch. This was not victory, just another chance to try. Another opportunity to choose compassion over fear, understanding over weapons. Some would succeed, some would fail. But each attempt mattered, each choice built toward a future where the unknown meant possibility instead of threat. He launched the shuttle toward the distressed vessel, medical equipment ready, no weapons carried. Not because there was no danger, but because he knew what happened when fear met fear. Someone had to break the cycle. Someone had to choose differently. As he navigated through the dark toward another frightened being in need of help, Dennis thought about Torvin's words. They carried these stories forward, he and the Vranic navigator. Stories of fear and compassion, of weapons and healing, of the moment when someone chose to reach out instead of reach for a gun. The unknown vessel grew larger in his viewport, systems failing, life signs weak. Somewhere inside was a being terrified and alone, unsure if help was coming or more violence. Dennis opened the communication channel, knowing they would not understand his words, but hoping they would understand his tone. I am here to help, he said into the dark. You are not alone anymore. He did not know if this encounter would end like Torvin's, with trust built and lives saved. He did not know if his choice would prove right or foolish. But he knew he would keep choosing compassion, keep looking for the fear beneath the unknown, keep trying to bridge the impossible gaps between species who had nothing in common except being alive and being afraid. Because Dennis Carter knew what fear looked like, and he knew what happened when someone responded to fear with understanding instead of weapons. Sometimes it made all the difference. Sometimes it changed everything. And sometimes that was enough to keep trying.